Tonight, we begin not with the tale of a mighty emperor or a legendary thinker, but with something far more perplexing and risky: the quest for love in the medieval world. Imagine attempting to find affection in an era of plagues, arranged unions, and ever-watchful chaperones. Compared to modern-day awkward texts sent at odd hours, medieval romance was a tangle of family politics, dowries, and property deals. From poetic verses sung beneath castle windows to negotiations involving goats and acres, the path to marriage was paved with more concern for inheritance than butterflies in the stomach. Before we embark on this journey, I invite you to pause and subscribe if you appreciate the tales we share here. Drop a comment below telling me where you're listening from. It's always a delight to know the places and times from which you join us. Now, let's dim the lights, perhaps switch on a small fan for that comforting hum, and drift together into the world of medieval matchmaking. Picture yourself standing in the heart of a medieval village, or perhaps within the chilly walls of a stone fortress, wondering how to spark a connection. Would you try to start a light conversation? Compliment someone's tunic? That isn't how love bloomed in those times. In the medieval age, dating as we know it didn't truly exist. There were no casual outings or exchanges of sweet messages. Instead, your parents, or perhaps your local lord or priest, were already working behind the scenes to determine whom you would wed and when. Often, livestock or land would seal these arrangements. For nobles, betrothals were frequently settled when children were too young to understand the weight of such decisions. It was common for a bride and groom to meet for the first time on their wedding day, standing awkwardly side by side as family interests were united. The goal was securing land, forging alliances, and ensuring the continuation of the lineage, not discovering shared hobbies or admiring each other's harp skills. Even for peasants, marriage was practical rather than romantic. A family might eye a hard-working lad who could thatch a roof, or a girl from a neighboring household with a productive goat. Thus began the courtship, less about passion, more about survival and stability. Falling in love before marriage? That was risky. Falling for someone outside of marriage? That was scandalous. Society placed immense importance on duty over desire. Yet human hearts are stubborn. Perhaps a young man wrote a small poem, hidden on scrap parchment. Maybe a girl stole glances at the market, hoping for an unnoticed smile. But mostly, they waited, obeyed, and hoped that affection might grow in time. Marriage wasn't about sparks flying. It was about shared fields and functioning roof tiles. A young man seeking to wed needed more than charm. Land, oxen, a solid set of tools. These were the signs of a worthy husband. A father who had already promised the family's best asset to an older son might steer a younger one toward the monastery instead. A young woman's worth was measured in dowry, coin, fabric, livestock. Wit and beauty meant little if the family could not provide these practical tokens. And if, by chance, your heart did flutter for someone, societal rules loomed large. Without equal standing in wealth or status, your longing was as fleeting as a breeze over the fields. Among the nobility, these issues became even more entangled. Marriage was diplomacy. You weren't just an individual. You were a treaty wrapped in silk. The joining of hands was often the joining of borders, debts, and titles. Even peasants married for land more than love, uniting pig pens and wheat fields, rather than hearts. And still, small gestures of affection found their way into this rigid system. A carved spoon, a simple ribbon, a basket of berries offered with nervous hope, tokens of feelings rarely spoken aloud. Then there was the strange and dramatic realm of courtly love. Knights in shining armor, pledging loyalty and adoration to noblewomen, women who were usually already married. This was a game of poetry and suffering, where the goal was not consummation, but the art of longing itself. The knight wore her. Colors sang her praises and dueled over slights, while the lady remained distant, untouchable, the inspiration for verses of endless devotion. This dance of gazes and sighs gave purpose to otherwise weary warriors, but it rarely ended in anything as tangible as a kiss. Tokens exchanged between these romantic performers were subtle and strategic. A glove pinned to a tunic, a ribbon tied around the sword. These items spoke volumes while allowing everyone to pretend they meant nothing. Among common folk, tokens were simpler: a wooden charm, a woven bracelet, perhaps a handkerchief stitched by candlelight. But even these small gifts carried risk, as missteps could spark rumors or unwanted promises. And throughout it all, chaperones hovered. Parents, priests, siblings, and servants ensured no unsanctioned moments slipped by. A walk meant supervision. A shared bench meant distance, unless an elder sat knitting nearby. Even letters were risky, with monasteries sometimes opening them to check for impropriety. Love, in medieval times, was a balancing act performed beneath the eyes of family, faith, and society. Those brave enough to confess their feelings resorted to letters filled with cryptic metaphors and poetic flourishes. To simply say, "I admire you," would never do. Instead, one might declare, "My heart is a stag pierced by your radiance, wandering lost in a forest of desire." Delivery was equally challenging. A loyal servant, a bribed monk, a wandering minstrel, singing your words beneath a balcony. The wrong turn of phrase could mean social ruin or worse, a stern sermon about morality. Occasionally, festivals provided rare opportunities for mingling. Harvest celebrations and spring fairs allowed a moment of levity. Dancing, singing, contests. These were not just entertainment, but the few spaces where flirtation could thrive, albeit carefully. A shared meat pie, a well-timed twirl, a flower. Crown given with a smile. These were moments where hearts dared to hope. For peasants, romance was practical. Admiration for a good work ethic, gifts of eggs or firewood, conversations shared over daily tasks. Proposals were swift, and marriages were alliances of survival rather than passion. A goat, a blanket, a patch of land. These built the foundations of family life. Marriage itself was no dreamy vow exchanged under the stars. It was a contract, sealed with witnesses, priests, and the careful tallying of assets. Among nobles, the negotiations were complex affairs involving dowries, land rights, and political ambitions. Divorce was rare and required significant justification. Annulments might be sought on technical grounds, but they were difficult to secure. More often, unhappy couples endured separate beds, separate lives, united only by duty and reputation. Marriage wasn't just a union of two souls in the medieval world. It was more of a binding contract, a transaction that merged families, estates, and livestock. Imagine standing at an altar, not as two people in love, but as representatives of larger economic agreements, while nearby, your family silently calculated what this alliance meant for their fields, their titles, and their fortunes. The church oversaw these unions with great seriousness, treating marriage as a sacred duty as much as a legal obligation. The ceremony might be adorned with prayers and blessings, but beneath it all was a ledger of assets being merged, debts being balanced, and futures being secured through shared labor and land. For nobles, marriage negotiations were intricate puzzles where every piece, dowry, land borders, future heirs, had to fit perfectly. Fathers and uncles pored over maps and lineage charts, while mothers and aunts ensured that no social slight would mar the arrangement. The bride and groom themselves often had little say, standing quietly as agreements were struck in documents. Prepared, their task was simple: comply and hope that affection might grow over time. Love was a distant bonus, not a prerequisite. Among common folk, the process was simpler, but no less transactional. A farmer might seek a bride whose family owned good pasture land, or a weaver might marry into a family with strong ties to the local guild. Marriage meant survival through cooperation, shared chores, shared burdens, shared winters. A man's worth might be measured in his tools and his oxen. A woman's in her skill at spinning or the contents of her dowry chest. Dowries were essential. A bride's family offering coin, goods, or livestock to smooth the path to marriage. A generous dowry might signal a family's status or help secure a better match, while a modest one could delay or derail marital hopes. Once married, the dowry became part of the husband's household economy, rarely retained as the wife's. Personal wealth. Similarly, in regions where the bride price was customary, the groom's family paid the bride's parents for the privilege of marriage, a transaction that recognized both the value of her labor and the shifting of family alliances. 4. Some, marriage was not the path chosen or available. The second son with no inheritance, the daughter with too small a dowry, or the youth drawn to spiritual life. These individuals often entered convents or monasteries. There they pledged poverty, chastity, and obedience, devoting themselves to prayer, study, and the service of their faith. And yet, even behind cloistered walls, the human heart was not so easily stilled. Quiet glances, whispered conversations, and shared labors sometimes blossomed into forbidden affection. Monastic love, though deeply discouraged, found its ways. A note tucked into a book of Psalms, a lingering touch while passing bread at table, a shared smile during Vespers. Punishments for these breaches of discipline could be severe: exile, penance, or reassignment to distant and lonely outposts. But such connections remind us that desire and tenderness persist, even where they are most unwelcome. And then there were those who defied the expected order entirely, the nobles who eloped for love, throwing aside duty and alliance to follow their hearts. These rare and scandalous unions disrupted carefully laid plans, enraged families, and sometimes sparked local wars. A baron's daughter might vanish in the night with a penniless knight, their hurried vows spoken in a distant chapel, while, behind them, households fumed and reputations burned. Yet, in some cases, such marriages endured, their passion forging bonds as strong as any treaty. Courtship rituals across classes shared certain elements: the exchange of tokens, the writing of letters, and the offering of small gifts. But the risks varied greatly. A noblewoman's misplaced favor could alter political alliances. A peasant's whispered promise could spark gossip that outlasted the harvest. Love letters, filled with lofty metaphors and veiled declarations, were dangerous treasures. A careless word might lead to scandal. A lost letter to heartbreak or disgrace. Festivals and feast days offered rare chances for mingling. On such days, strict boundaries softened just enough for hopeful glances and cautious flirtation. Dances, games, and shared meals allowed for moments of connection, brief though they might be. A well-timed jest, a shared piece of honey cake, a twirl around the maypole. These could light a spark that might, with luck and patience, survive beyond the festival's end. For peasants, romance often unfolded amid labor. A smile exchanged over a shared task, a hand extended during the mending of a fence, a basket of eggs left on a doorstep. These were the small gestures that built toward partnership. Theirs was a love grounded in practicality, forged through shared work and mutual respect. Marriage followed swiftly once families agreed. The ceremony, whether simple or grand, marked the start of a new chapter of cooperation. There were no lengthy engagements or prolonged courtships. Life was too demanding, survival too immediate. Together, the couple faced the endless tasks of tending land, raising children, and weathering the changing seasons. But not all marriages were happy. Without true choice, many found themselves bound to partners they neither loved nor admired. Some grew to care for one another over time, while others lived parallel lives, united only by duty and necessity. A husband and wife might sleep apart, share little conversation, and pour their frustrations into work, prayer, or quiet resentment. Affairs, though condemned by the church, were not uncommon, carried out in secrecy and often tolerated, so long as discretion was maintained. Widowhood, when it came, often brought unexpected freedom. A woman who had long been subject to her husband's will might now manage her own household, make decisions for her family, and in some cases, choose a new partner for love rather than duty. A widower, too, might seek companionship anew, hoping, this time for warmth and understanding as much as practical alliance, and so the cycles continued, births and deaths, unions and losses, each shaped by the customs, beliefs, and necessities of the time. Beneath the layers of duty and expectation, the human heart persisted, longing, dreaming, daring, and sometimes defying the world in which it beat. The medieval world saw love as both a blessing and a danger. It could unite families or tear them apart, inspire great poetry, or provoke bitter feuds. Above all, it reminded people that, despite the strict rules and harsh realities of their time, they were still human, still vulnerable to the mysteries of the heart. In the medieval world, love and marriage were rarely left to chance. Beyond the duties and negotiations, there were deeper layers of belief, superstition, and even cosmic consultation shaping the choices people made or felt forced to make. Before contemplating a match, families and advisors often looked to the stars. Astrology was no idle amusement. Monks, scholars, and learned men cast charts to determine whether two people were cosmically compatible. A nobleman's daughter born under a certain moon might be seen as a poor match for a suitor born beneath an unlucky star. Venus and Mars, Jupiter and Saturn, these celestial bodies, were called upon to approve or deny earthly unions. Superstitions extended beyond the heavens. A raven circling above a courting couple could be seen as a dark omen. Dropping bread during a meal shared with a prospective match might doom the romance. Families paid heed to birthmarks, dreams, and strange coincidences, searching for signs that the union was either blessed or cursed. But while omens and astrology shaped choices, the rules of the church loomed largest. The church's laws about who could marry whom were strict and often complex. Marrying a cousin, even a distant one, typically required official dispensation, which the wealthy could sometimes secure for a price. The poor had no such luxury, and so potential matches were often set aside not for lack of affection, but for fear of breaking sacred law. Cross-class romances, those tales of a noble falling for a commoner, were rarities that mostly survived in a form of tragic ballads or whispered legends. When they happened, they were viewed as either miraculous exceptions or dangerous transgressions that threatened the natural order. A lord taking interest in a peasant girl could spark outrage, while a noble woman showing affection for a humble knight might see herself the subject of scandal. Still, the human heart often ignored these boundaries. Love found its way through the cracks of duty and expectation. Some defied the rules, risking reputation, wealth, and even their lives for the chance to choose their own partner. These stories, rare as they were, lived on, cherished for generations, as reminders that passion could, if only briefly, outshine politics out beyond marriage and courtship. Life in the medieval world was shaped by the constant presence of community. Few moments of privacy existed. Eyes and ears were everywhere. Neighbors, servants, clergy. A young couple's shared glance could become the subject of gossip. A man's offer of assistance to a woman not of his family might be seen as suspicious. People learned to guard their affections, to cloak longing beneath courtesy and duty. Those who desired to express their feelings, creativity was essential. A lover might carve initials into a tree, hidden deep in a forest. A baker might shape bread into a token of affection, delivering it under the pretense of a gift for the household. A seamstress might embroider a secret symbol into a handkerchief, hoping her beloved would understand its meaning. These small, silent gestures were safer than spoken words, less likely to provoke scandal. At festivals and holy days, there was room for more daring. Under the guise of celebration, hearts could speak, if only in riddles. A dance offered a chance to hold a hand. A song sung beneath a window risked discovery, but also carried the thrill of boldness. The fairgrounds and feasting halls became theaters where the drama of love played out, each gesture layered with meaning, each word weighed for what it revealed or concealed. Even in such carefully controlled environments, mistakes happened. A token given to the wrong person might bind two people unwillingly. A jest misinterpreted could spark feuds between families. A smile held too long could invite suspicion or worse. Love in this world was like walking a narrow path along a cliff's edge. One wrong step, and the fall could be steep. For peasants, the challenges were different, though no less real. Love might grow through shared hardship, tending animals, repairing fences, braving storms. A man admired a woman who could carry a heavy bucket without complaint. A woman valued a man who could mend a roof before the rains came. Their courtship was practical, their gestures small but meaningful. A fresh turnip left at a doorstep, a woven cord gifted after a long day's work. Marriage came quickly once families agreed. The ceremony was simple. A blessing, a shared cup, witnesses to mark the bond. The couple's true work began afterward, building a life from scratch, raising children, and enduring whatever trials the seasons delivered. If love grew from this partnership, it was a blessing. If not, they endured, bound by vows and necessity. Among nobles, marriage was rarely about choice. A young woman might be promised to a man she had never met, her hand traded to secure a border or repay a debt. A young lord might find himself bound to a bride chosen for her dowry rather than her character. The wedding feast might be grand, the vows spoken in Latin beneath the arches of a great church, but the foundation was political. Calculation. For the rare few who married for love, those who dared defy their families, the cost was high. Elopement might mean loss of title, inheritance, and home. Families feuded, alliances shattered, and the couple often lived in exile or poverty, their happiness paid for in disgrace. Yet their stories lived on, sung by minstrels as proof that sometimes love's fire burned brighter than duty's chains. In the shadows of monasteries and convents, hearts struggled too. Men and women who had renounced the world found themselves drawn to each other, despite their vows. A shared prayer, a stolen glance, a hand briefly touched during the lighting of candles. These small moments carried enormous weight. The consequences of such attachments could be severe: confession, penance, exile. Yet still, such feelings arose, proving that no walls, however high, could entirely contain the heart. And so, in a world governed by duty, faith, and survival, love persisted, quietly, stubbornly, and often painfully. It was a force at once dangerous and beautiful, a reminder that beneath the layers of custom and expectation, people longed, dreamed, and reached for connection. The dance of love and marriage in the medieval world was rarely smooth. It was a waltz of obligations, beliefs, and fleeting hopes, performed beneath the ever-watchful gaze of society. Yet in stolen moments and whispered promises, in hidden tokens and shared labors, hearts found ways to speak, even when voices could not. The medieval world was filled with ceremonies, rituals, and customs that shaped not just marriage, but every stage of love and partnership. Engagements, for example, were often formal affairs, negotiated between families long before the couple involved had exchanged more than a glance. A father might offer a dowry, a parcel of land, or a herd of cattle, to secure his daughter's future. In return, the groom's family might promise protection, alliance, or even forgiveness of debts. These engagements were binding in the eyes of both the church and the law, and breaking one could lead to scandal, lawsuits, or even feuds that lasted for generations. When the day of the wedding arrived, it was both a solemn vow and a public declaration of new ties. In village chapels or great cathedrals, couples stood before priests, families, and communities, pledging themselves not just to each other, but to the larger web of obligations that surrounded them. Rings were exchanged where custom allowed, and tokens like coins or bread loaves were sometimes given as symbols of prosperity. The church blessed these unions, invoking God's witness to their promises, and often reminded the couple of their duties: to be faithful, to raise children, and to live according to the moral laws of the land. After the ceremony, celebrations varied according to wealth and status. A peasant wedding feast might consist of bread, cheese, and ale, shared with neighbors in a simple home. A noble's wedding could last for days, with music, dancing, hunting parties, and elaborate displays of generosity. At these feasts, guests toasted the couple, offered blessings, and sometimes, through jest or riddle, hinted at the hopes or concerns that accompanied the match. But marriage was only the beginning. Life together was a partnership forged through work, patience, and endurance. Peasant couples shared the endless tasks of tending fields, caring for animals, and raising children. Each day demanded cooperation: fetching water, chopping wood, mending fences, gathering herbs, and preparing food. Their bond was tested in the harsh winters, in the lean years when harvests failed, and in the small joys of a well-repaired roof or a healthy child. For nobles, the work was different, but no less consuming. A lady might oversee the household, manage servants, and ensure that the estates ran smoothly during her husband's absences. A lord might spend long months away at court or on campaign, leaving his wife to act as steward of his lands. Letters passed between them, full of reports on crops, disputes among tenants, or the health of their children. Affection might grow. In these exchanges, or it might not, duty often came first, love second. If at all, the raising of children was a central duty of marriage. Sons were trained early in the skills they would need: riding, hunting, managing land, and leading men. Daughters learned the arts of household management, needlework, and the customs that would prepare them for marriage. Both boys and girls were taught their prayers and expected to know their place within the family's plans. A child's future was mapped long before they reached adulthood, each decision shaped by inheritance, alliance, and necessity. Widow brought both sorrow and change. A woman who lost her husband might find herself with new responsibilities, managing property, defending her children's rights, and making decisions that once belonged to her spouse. Some widows remarried quickly, seeking protection or partnership. Others remained independent, respected in their communities for their wisdom and experience. A man who lost his wife might seek a new bride to help him care for his household, his children, and his lands. Divorce, as we know, it did not exist. Marriages were seen as sacred and indissoluble, a bond formed before God and not to be broken lightly. The rare annulment required proof that the marriage had been unlawful from the start, that one partner was already married, that they were too closely related, or that the union had never been consummated. These cases were rare and often involved complex legal and ecclesiastical battles, with reputation and inheritance hanging in the balance. Beyond marriage, the medieval world offered few approved outlets for love outside of wedlock. Adultery was a grave sin, condemned by the church and often punished by law or custom. A noble caught in an affair might face exile, loss of title, or worse. A commoner might be subject to public penance, fines, or the scorn of neighbors. Yet, such affairs occurred, hidden in shadows, whispered about in kitchens, and immortalized in songs and stories. Courtly love, that strange and stylized tradition, offered nobles a way to express longing and admiration without, at least in theory, violating moral codes. A knight pledged his service to a lady, often one married to another, and sang her praises, wrote her verses, and wore her colors in tournaments. The lady, in turn, offered smiles, tokens, or kind words, but was expected to remain distant, untouchable, a beacon of virtue. The line between honor and scandal was thin, and many crossed it, whether through true passion or reckless desire. Tokens of affection in the medieval world were small, subtle, and fraught with meaning. A ribbon tied to a sword hilt, a glove tucked into a tunic, a sprig of herbs left at a doorstep. Each gesture spoke volumes to those who understood. A misplaced gift could create unintended promises. A return token could signal rejection or the end of hope. In a world where words were carefully guarded and actions watched by many eyes, these small exchanges with a language of love. Festivals and fairs were rare opportunities for courtship to bloom, if only briefly. Music, dancing, and shared meals allowed for interactions not possible in the rigid routines of daily life. A hand clasp during a dance, a jest shared over ale, or a prize won in a contest. These moments, though fleeting, carried weight. They might be remembered for years, cherished as the spark of affection, or mourned as a chance lost. In all these forms, love in the medieval world was both constrained and elevated. It was bound by duty, watched by society, and judged by the church. Yet it endured, finding expression in the smallest moments, the quietest gestures, and the most private thoughts. The heart's longing was universal. Even in an age when choice was often a luxury, few could afford. In the intricate tapestry of medieval life, love and marriage were not simply private matters. They were threads woven through the fabric of society, politics, and faith. Every union carried weight beyond the couple at its center, binding together families, lands, fortunes, and reputations. In the eyes of the church, marriage was sacred, a divine contract not to be entered lightly nor broken easily. Each step of courtship and union was watched, guided, and judged, not only by loved ones, but by communities, clergy, and in some cases, kings. Among the nobility, marriage negotiations were strategic maneuvers, as calculated as any military campaign. A proposed match was rarely about affection. It was about territory, alliances, and power. A daughter's hand might secure peace between feuding lords, strengthen claims to disputed lands, or bolster a family standing at court. Sons were expected to marry advantageously, bringing in wealth, connections, or political leverage. These matches were arranged early, sometimes when the bride and groom were still children, their futures sealed long before they had any say in the matter. Betrothals were formalized through written agreements, often sealed with symbolic gestures, the exchange of gifts, the joining of hands, the blessing of a priest. Breaking a betrothal could lead to disgrace, legal disputes, or even violence between families. For the young nobles involved, these promises were binding, shaping the course of their lives, whether they wished it or not. When marriage came, the ceremonies were as grand or modest as a family's station allowed. For nobles, they were displays of wealth and influence, filled with feasts, music, and public vows. For commoners, the rituals were simpler but no less meaningful. A blessing before the village altar, witnessed by kin and neighbors. No matter the scale, the essence was the same: two lives joined before God, bound by sacred promise. Life within marriage demanded resilience and cooperation. For peasants, daily existence was a shared struggle against the land, the elements, and the demands of survival. Husbands and wives labored side by side, tending fields, raising livestock, mending tools, and keeping house. Their bond was strengthened by hardship and necessity. Forged in the fires of everyday toil. Noble couples faced different challenges. A lord might spend long stretches away, at court, on campaign, or managing distant holdings. His lady remained, to oversee the estate, settle disputes, and protect their interests. Letters carried news, affection, and commands across the miles, a fragile thread of connection in a world where absence was common. Love could grow through these exchanges, but duty often overshadowed desire. Parenthood was both joy and responsibility. Children were the future, heirs to lands, titles, and trades. Their births were celebrated, their upbringing carefully planned. Sons were trained in arms, governance, or trade. Daughters in household management, needlework, and the graces expected of wives and mothers. Even in childhood, their lives were shaped by the expectations of marriage and alliance, their worth, measured in dowries, skills, and connections. Widowhood brought a change in fortune, particularly for women. A widow might inherit control of property, manage a household, and act with a degree of independence unknown during marriage. Some remarried quickly, seeking security or companionship. Others chose or were compelled to remain single, their lives devoted to their children's welfare or to religious pursuits. Love outside marriage was perilous. Adultery was condemned as sin, punished by law and custom. A noble caught in an affair might face loss of standing, exile, or worse. A commoner risked fines, penance, or the cold judgment of neighbors. Yet forbidden's love persisted, whispered, about in kitchens, immortalized in songs, and hidden behind the walls of castles and cottages alike. The tradition of courtly love offered nobles a strange outlet for passion, a stylized devotion in which a knight adored a lady, often one beyond. His reach through poetry, service, and symbolic acts. The lady, in turn, was expected to remain pure and distant, an ideal rather than a partner. The game of courtly love played out in tournaments, in songs, and in secret glances, balancing dangerously between honor and scandal. Among the common folk, love was quieter, but no less deep. It grew in the rhythm of shared work, in the comfort of a familiar voice, at the end of a long day, in small kindnesses and simple joys. Courtship was practical, a helping hand, a gift of food, a promise of support. Proposals were often straightforward, the result of mutual respect and the approval of families. Festivals and market days offered rare moments for young people to mingle more freely. Music, dancing, and contests gave them chances to exchange smiles, words, and perhaps the beginnings of affection. A prize won at a game, a piece of bread shared, garland placed on a head. These small acts carried meaning in a world where overt declarations were rare and risky. Marriage brought new challenges. The work of building a life together required patience, compromise, and endurance. For some, love deepened over time, nurtured by shared experiences and trials. For others, affection faded, leaving only duty and habit. A household could be a place of warmth and partnership, or a cold arrangement, endured for the sake of appearances and obligation. The church loomed large over these unions, reminding couples of their vows and duties. It offered guidance, imposed penance for failings, and upheld the sanctity of marriage against the temptations of the flesh and the failings of the heart. Divorce was unheard of, annulment rare and difficult to obtain. Marriage was for life, a sacred bond sealed before God. And community. In all this, the human longing for connection, understanding, and affection persisted. Love in the medieval world was a flower that grew in narrow cracks, in brief moments of freedom, and small acts of courage. It was a force that defied the strictest rules and most rigid customs, a reminder of the shared humanity that endured beneath the layers of rank, duty, and tradition. In the medieval world, survival often took precedence over sentiment, but even in a life of toil, hardship, and duty, people yearned for connection. Love was rarely the primary goal of marriage, but it remained a quiet hope, a blessing if it bloomed in the midst of responsibility. The peasant's marriage was as much a partnership of survival as it was a union of hearts. Fields needed tending, livestock required care, and children had to be raised to carry on the work of the family. A husband and wife depended on each other as they faced harsh winters, poor harvests, and the daily demands of rural life. Their affection, when it grew, did so through small acts. A shared meal after a long day, a helping hand during a storm, the silent understanding between two people who had endured together. No grand declarations or flowery poems marked these relationships. Instead, love was woven into the fabric of everyday life, subtle and steadfast. For nobles, the stakes were different. Marriage was a tool of diplomacy and strategy. A union could seal a peace treaty, forge an alliance, or expand a family's power. The emotions of the bride and groom mattered little in these arrangements. What counted was the dowry, the land, the titles, and the potential for heirs. A young noblewoman might marry a man decades her senior because his lands bordered her father's, or because his influence at court could protect her family's interests. A young lord might wed a bride he had never met, chosen for her family's wealth or political connections. In such marriages, love was a luxury, something that might come in time or might not. The best unions were those where affection grew, alongside duty, where respect and companionship softened the edges of obligation. The worst were cold, distant, and filled with resentment. Two strangers bound together by law and custom, forced to maintain appearances for the sake of honor and inheritance. Children, born of these unions, carried the hopes and burdens of their families. From infancy, their futures were charted. Sons destined for knighthood, the church, or stewardship of estates. Daughters prepared for marriage, trained in the arts of household management, diplomacy, and piety. Every child was an asset, to be secured, an investment in the family's future. Their joys, sorrows, and choices were often secondary to the greater game of lineage and legacy. Yet, even in this world of duty, the human heart found ways to assert itself. Forbidden love stories thrived, whispered in kitchens, sung by minstrels, and immortalized in legends. The lady who fell for her husband's squire, the knight who adored a married duchess, the peasant girl who caught the eye of a lord. These tales spoke to the universal desire for choice, for passion unbound by custom. Such romances were dangerous. Adultery was a grave sin, condemned by the church and punished by law. A noblewoman caught in an affair could face exile, imprisonment, or worse. A man found guilty of seducing another's wife might lose his lands, his title, or his life. For commoners, the consequences were public penance, fines, or brutal shame within their communities. Still, the yearning for love endured, expressed through tokens and secret gestures. A carved charm, a folded scrap of parchment bearing a line, a verse, a ribbon tied to a sword. These small items carried great meaning, signals exchanged beneath the gaze of a watching world. A misstep, a gift given to the wrong person, or a message intercepted could mean ruin. The game of love in medieval times was as treacherous as any battlefield. Festivals, fairs, and holy days provided rare moments when the rules relaxed. Music filled the air, people danced, and for a short while, smiles could be shared more freely and glances lingered longer. A prize won at a contest, a flower given after a dance. These tokens might spark a courtship or remain cherished memories of a fleeting chance. For those who chose a life apart from marriage, monks, nuns, and hermits, the struggle between duty and desire continued in other ways. The vows of chastity, poverty, and obedience were meant to remove worldly temptations. Yet even within monastery walls, the human heart beat with longing. Friendships could deepen into attachments, and moments of kindness might stir feelings that vows forbade. A whispered prayer might mask a sigh. A shared task might lead to dangerous closeness. The consequences of such attachments were severe: penance, exile, or reassignment to distant, harsh outposts. Yet not all love stories ended in sorrow. Some couples, despite arranged beginnings, found true partnership. Through shared burdens, through raising children, through enduring the hardships of their age, they grew to respect and cherish each other. Love, in these cases, was not a fire that burned bright and brief, but a steady flame, warming their days and lighting their nights dot in this world. Love had to be resilient, adaptable, and patient. It was a seed that, if it took root, did so in stony soil, watered by perseverance and hope. The medieval heart, though constrained by duty, faith, and custom, still dreamed, still longed, still reached for connection, however fragile or fleeting. The medieval world's idea of love was deeply intertwined with survival, status, and sanctity. Every glance exchanged, every word spoken between potential partners, carried weight, for in a society governed by duty and faith, nothing about affection could be taken lightly. For most, marriage was less about individual desire and more about continuing family lines, preserving land, and strengthening alliances. Even so, the heart often whispered its own wishes, sometimes in harmony with duty, sometimes in defiance. For peasants, love often grew where labor was shared. A young man might notice a woman's steady hands as she spun wool, or her quiet strength as she hauled water from the well. A woman might admire a man's care for his animals, or his skill at thatching a roof before the rains came. Their connection blossomed through daily interactions. A basket of apples offered at market, a hand lent in lifting a heavy load, a smile shared over a mug of ale after a long day's work. In this world, romantic gestures were practical. A carved wooden spoon, a small bundle of herbs, or a well-repaired tool given as a gift spoke volumes. Courtship wasn't about grand declarations or dramatic poems. It was about demonstrating reliability, kindness, and the ability to contribute to a shared life. When families approved and circumstances allowed, these relationships led to marriage. A union marked not by luxury or indulgence, but by the promise of facing life's hardships together. A wedding among peasants was simple. Blessings at the village church, witnessed by neighbors and kin, followed by a modest feast of bread, cheese, and whatever could be spared. For nobles, the path to marriage was far more complex and calculated. Young lords and ladies were often pawns in larger games of power and politics. A marriage might settle a dispute between rival houses, secure claims to contested lands, or forge crucial alliances. The consent of the couple mattered little. Instead, fathers, mothers, uncles, and sometimes monarchs decided their fates, negotiating contracts and dowries with the precision of generals, planning a campaign. The ceremonies of noble weddings were grand spectacles designed to display wealth and prestige. Days of feasting, tournaments, and gifts marked the occasion. Yet behind the splendor, the same concerns guided these unions as those of the humblest villagers: survival, stability, and the continuation of the family line. Love in such matches was not guaranteed. Some couples found affection over time. Their bond strengthened through shared responsibilities, mutual respect, and the raising of children. Others lived as strangers within the same walls, their lives governed by duty rather than feeling. Parenthood, for all classes, was a central duty of marriage. Children were blessings, but also responsibilities. Sons learned early the skills they would need: farming, craftsmanship, or for nobles, riding, swordsmanship, and estate management. Daughters were taught to keep house, weave, sew, and if of noble birth, manage a household or negotiate the subtle politics of a lord's court. Each child represented the future of the family, and their upbringing was a serious matter. The church played an ever-present role in shaping how love and marriage were viewed. It blessed unions, counseled couples, and acted as guardian of morality. Adultery, whether among peasants or nobles, was condemned as both sin and crime. A woman caught in an affair might face public shame, loss of status, or even harsh punishment. A man found guilty of seducing another's wife risked fines, exile, or worse. Yet human hearts rarely obey rules so easily. Stories abound of secret loves. The knight who adored a lady already wed, the noblewoman who longed for a bard or squire, the peasant who fell for one beyond his station. Such romances were dangerous, their risks great, their rewards uncertain. Courtly, love provided a socially acceptable, if complicated, outlet for noble passions. A knight might pledge loyalty to a lady, composing verses in her honor, wearing her token at a joust, or performing deeds in her name. This love was meant to be chaste, a celebration of virtue and longing rather than fulfillment. Yet the line between idealized devotion and illicit desire was thin, and many crossed it at village fairs, holy days, and market gatherings. Peasants found rare opportunities for courtship beyond the watchful eyes of family and priest. Music, dancing, and contests offered moments of connection. A prize won at archery, a garland placed upon a maiden's brow, a loaf of bread shared between two. These small gestures were the seeds from which affection might grow. Life within marriage demanded endurance. For peasants, it was a daily partnership in the struggle to survive. For nobles, it was often a delicate balancing act between personal feeling and public duty. Some unions flourished, nurtured by mutual care. Others endured in cold civility, bound together by obligation alone. Widowhood brought both grief and change. A widow, especially among the nobility, might manage estates, represent her family's interests, and act with a degree of independence unknown to her as a wife. Some chose to remarry, seeking security or companionship. Others remained alone, respected as matriarchs or feared as symbols of loss and misfortune. Throughout all this, love endured, not always as passion or romance, but as quiet devotion, shared burdens, and the longing for understanding and companionship. The medieval heart, like hearts in all ages, hoped, dreamed, and, when it could, reached for connection amid duty's demands. In the medieval world, love and marriage were not simply personal matters. They were threads in the grand tapestry of survival, faith, duty, and legacy. For both peasants and nobles, the idea of marrying for love alone was rare and often considered reckless. Yet even within these boundaries, the human heart sought connection, understanding, and tenderness, desires as old as time. For villagers, courtship was woven into the rhythms of daily labor. A young man's strength might be admired as he hoisted a sack of grain onto his shoulder, or his patience, respected as he guided a stubborn ox. A woman's quiet resilience might catch notice as she managed a bustling kitchen or tended a garden with care. Small gestures spoke loudly. A lad offering help during harvest, a girl sharing fresh bread after a long day in the fields. Such connections often grew slowly, tested by shared toil and witnessed by all. Privacy was rare. A stolen glance across the market square or a quick word exchanged at the well might be all a pair could manage beneath the watchful eyes of kin and neighbors. Reputation mattered deeply. A whisper of impropriety could damage a maiden's prospects or a young man's standing. Village gatherings and festivals provided rare moments of lightness in lives otherwise burdened by work. During these precious occasions, music played, feet danced upon packed earth, and laughter mingled with the scent of roasted meats and fresh flowers. A garland placed upon a girl's brow, a hand offered during a lively round dance. These small courtesies became the sparks that sometimes kindled lifelong bonds. But once a match was made, marriage was not the end of labor, but the beginning of new responsibilities. For peasants, the wedding was often a simple affair, vows exchanged before God, a blessing from the priest, and a modest celebration shared with the village. The true work began afterward. Together, the couple faced the demands of tending fields, raising animals, managing stores of grain, and preparing for the uncertainties of each season. For nobles, marriage was even more entangled in duty. A nobleman's bride might be chosen when she was still a child, promised as part of a treaty or alliance. A young lady might find herself wed to a stranger, a man decades her senior, whose lands and titles were the true prize in the union. The wedding feast would dazzle with its richness, tables groaning beneath the weight of meats, pies and sweetmeats, goblets filled with wine, and minstrels singing of loyalty and valor. But beneath the splendor lay a cold calculus of power, property, and lineage. For noblewomen, marriage was both a duty and a trial. A wife was expected to bear heirs, oversee the household, and manage the affairs of the estate in her husband's absence. In some cases, this responsibility brought a measure of respect and influence. A wise lady of the manor might wield quiet power. Her counsel sought on matters of land and law. But always, she was judged by her ability to secure her family's future through children, especially sons. The church loomed large over every union. Marriage was not simply a contract. It was a sacrament, a holy bond blessed by God and overseen by the clergy. Divorce, as we would understand it today, was virtually impossible. Annulments might be granted, but only in specific circumstances. A union never consummated, a close blood relation discovered, or proof of coercion. Adultery was a grave sin, punishable by penance, fines, or public shame. Yet, despite the weight of duty, the heart could not always be silenced. Forbidden love stories flourished in whispers and songs. The knight who adored a lady already wed, the maiden who dared to dream of the blacksmith's apprentice instead of the husband chosen for her. These were the tales that minstrels carried from hall to hall, that mothers warned daughters about, and that lovers lived at great peril. Courtly love was the formalized outlet for noble yearning. In this game of glances and verses, a knight pledged devotion to a lady, often unattainable, and proved his loyalty through deeds of valor. He might wear her favor at tournaments or compose poetry in her honor. The lady, for her part, was to remain distant and virtuous, the object of admiration, but not possession. Yet, human hearts being what they are, not all such relationships remained within the bounds of propriety. Among commoners, love was more grounded in reality. A man who could build a sturdy fence or repair a cart axle was far more appealing than one with a silver tongue. A woman who could keep a hearth warm and a larder full was prized above one whose beauty alone might turn heads. Marriage was a partnership of labor, as essential as the tools hung by the door or the animals in the pen. Widow, though often a time of grief, could also bring unexpected freedom, especially for women. A widow might find herself the mistress of her household, managing property, negotiating with tenants, and even representing the family's interests in local matters. Some chose to remarry for security or companionship. Others found in their widowhood a measure of independence they had never known as wives. Tokens of affection were treasured in this world of rules and roles. A carved wooden brooch, a sprig of rosemary, a ribbon tied with care. Such small items might carry the weight of 1,000 unspoken words. But they could also be dangerous, misinterpreted, or discovered by the wrong person, turning a quiet longing into public scandal. Throughout all this, love persisted, not always in the form of grand passions or dramatic declarations, but in the steady work of partnership, in the quiet moments shared at the end of a long day, in the small kindnesses exchanged between two people bound together by more than law or custom. The medieval heart, constrained by faith, duty, and survival, still longed, still dreamed, still reached for connection where it could be found not in the medieval world. The ties that bound individuals together were as strong as iron chains, forged not in fire, but in custom, belief, and necessity. Love, marriage, family, these were not private matters of the heart alone. They were the pillars upon which communities stood, the foundation for alliances, and the means by which a fragile existence was secured. To understand how people loved in such times is to glimpse the human spirit striving for tenderness amid hardship, affection beneath layers of duty. For peasants, life's demands left little room for idle romance. Days began before dawn, filled with the clatter of tools, the lowing of livestock, the rhythm of labor that was as unending as the seasons. Yet within these tasks, moments of connection blossomed quietly. A shared load of firewood, a helping hand during harvest, a loaf of bread left on a doorstep. All these were the language of courtship, more meaningful than any flowery speech. Communities were small, and everyone's business was everyone else's concern. A glance exchanged across a market, a word spoken too warmly at the well, could stir gossip as surely as a storm stirred dust. Reputation was as precious as bread. A young woman's modesty or a young man's honor could shape their futures more firmly than any dowry or inheritance. Village festivals offered brief reprieves from the grind of work. These gatherings, with their bright banners and lively tunes, brought joy into lives often weighed down by toil. Young men tried to impress their sweethearts by winning at contests, archery, wrestling, or foot races. Young women wore garlands of flowers, their laughter ringing like bells, their steps light in the dance. For a few stolen hours, hearts could speak in gestures and glances, unburdened by duty's heavy yoke. But marriage soon followed where courtship bloomed. Among peasants, weddings were simple affairs, blessed by the village priest, witnessed by kin and neighbor, celebrated with shared bread, ale, and perhaps a single roasted pig. Gifts were humble, a sack of grain, a warm cloak, a sturdy tool. The true wealth of the union was in the promise of shared labor, shared burdens, and shared hope. Noble unions, in contrast, were tangled in politics and ambition. A nobleman might never meet his bride until the day they wed, his future determined not by love, but by the need to secure a border, settle a feud, or claim a rich estate. A noblewoman might be promised in infancy, her worth measured in acres and alliances. There, weddings were grand spectacles, tables laden with meats and pies, halls decked in banners, minstrels playing songs of chivalry, all designed to display power and wealth. Yet beneath the glitter lay cold calculation, a ledger's tally of what each party gained. The bride and groom, adorned in their finery, played their parts while decisions were made over their heads and futures set upon paths not of their choosing. Still, not all noble marriages were barren of affection. Time, shared trials, the raising of children. These could knit hearts together where once only duty bound them. Some noble couples found friendship and respect, if not passion. Others lived as strangers within gilded cages, seeking solace in prayer, music, or the company of others. The church's role in these unions was immense. Marriage was holy, unbreakable in the eyes of God. To stray from one's vows was to sin not only against spouse, but against heaven itself. Adultery brought penance, shame, and sometimes exile. Divorce was nearly unknown, annulment a rare and difficult prize, granted only under strict conditions. Yet human frailty persisted. Secret loves flourished behind cloistered walls and castle. Stones and the heart's longings often ran afoul of law and creed. Courtly love, that strange dance of longing without fulfillment, offered nobles a way to channel desire without, in theory, dishonor. A knight might pledge himself to a lady, his loyalty sealed in songs and tokens. He might wear her colors at a tourney, fight in her name, or compose verses extolling her virtues. The lady, remote and virtuous, was to inspire but never yield. Yet often, beneath this play of purity, real feelings stirred, and real danger followed. In peasant life, tokens of affection were simpler, yet no less meaningful. A carved spoon, a woven belt, a bundle of herbs tied with care. These were treasures of the heart. A gift given spoke of intent, a gift accepted of hope. But such tokens could also bring trouble. A favor offered too boldly, a kindness mistaken, could fuel gossip, stir resentment, and ruin prospects. Widowhood changed a woman's place in the world. Freed from the authority of husband or father, a widow might manage lands, lead a household, and act with a measure of independence rare. For her sex, some widows remarried quickly, seeking protection or alliance. Others chose solitude, finding dignity in their autonomy. Tokens could be dangerous as well as sweet. A misplaced glove, a ribbon fallen from a sleeve, a brooch recognized at the wrong moment. These small things might spark scandal, feed rumor, or even bring ruin. And yet, love found its way. Stubborn as weeds between stones, bright as flowers blooming in the cracks of duty's hard road. Throughout all, the medieval heart beat with hopes familiar to us still, to find understanding, companionship, and joy amid the trials of life. Beneath the weight of law and custom, faith and fear, people sought connection, offered kindness, and dreamed of love's small, enduring comforts. In the tapestry of medieval life, love was a thread woven tightly. Between duty, survival, and faith, people lived by the seasons, the church calendar, and the demands of the land, but the longing for connection, for affection and partnership, pulsed quietly beneath. From peasant villages to noble courts, hearts beat with hopes and fears, shaped by a world where survival came first. But companionship remained a treasured prize. For the ordinary folk, love was rarely dramatic. It grew out of daily work, the shared toil of planting, tending, harvesting, and building. A young man might show his interest, not with grand gestures, but by lending a hand at market or mending a neighbor's fence. A young woman's kindness might be seen in the way she shared fresh cheese or tended the sick. Romance was practical, grounded in the real challenges of life. Could this person help weather a hard winter? Could they manage a household, raise children, and keep the hearth warm? The community watched every interaction. In a world where neighbors were like family, and family was everything, courtship was as public as it was personal. A smile at the wrong moment, a word spoken too warmly, might set tongues wagging. Reputations were built slowly and could be damaged in an instant. A girl thought too bold, a boy seen as too reckless. Both might struggle to find a match. Festivals and holy days offered rare chances for freedom. At these times, songs filled the air, feet stamped the ground in lively dances, and young people laughed without fear of censure. Ribbons were tied in hair, garlands placed on brows, tokens exchanged in secret. For a few precious hours, hearts could hope. But marriage was never just about hope. Among peasants, it was a partnership forged in necessity. A wedding might mean a new roof raised with the help of neighbors, a dowry of tools or animals, a promise sealed with bread and ale. The couple stepped into a future of hard work and shared burdens, knowing that survival depended on their unity. For nobles, marriage was a matter of strategy. Land, power, and legacy shaped unions more than affection ever did. A young lady might be betrothed before she could speak, her future husband chosen for his title or army, not his character. A nobleman might find his bride selected by his father's ambitions, a pawn in a larger game. Weddings were grand affairs, feasts that lasted. For days, minstrels singing of valor and loyalty, halls hung with bright banners. Yet beneath the splendor lay cold calculations. Every toast celebrated not just the couple, but the lands and titles their union secured. Within these unions, love sometimes grew. A marriage begun in duty might soften into friendship, built on shared trials and quiet moments. Other times, affection was sought elsewhere, in secret glances, whispered words, or the dangerous game of courtly love. Courtly love was the noble's escape from duty's chains, a game of longing, of admiration without fulfillment. A knight might ride in his lady's name, wear her colors at tourneys, write verses in her honor. The lady, ever distant, ever virtuous, was to inspire but never yield. Yet human hearts often broke the rules of the game, and scandal followed, where longing turned to action. For the church, marriage was sacred. It was a bond before God, unbreakable save for rare exceptions. Divorce was nearly unheard of. Annulments granted only with great difficulty. The faithful were warned against adultery, against lust, against the dangers of desire. Yet sermons and penance could not wholly quiet the heart's yearnings. Tokens of love, a carved button, a sprig of lavender, a length of ribbon were given and received with care. These small gifts spoke what lips dared not say, but they could also bring risk. A ribbon noticed by the wrong eyes, a token dropped where it might be found, could spark rumors, destroy reputations, and alter lives. Widows freed from marriages. Bonds often found a measure of power. A woman who had buried a husband might manage lands, make contracts, and act with a voice rarely allowed to wives or daughters. Some remarried, seeking alliance or protection. Others chose independence, their years of service repaid at last with dignity. Peasant and noble alike lived within the boundaries set by law, faith, and necessity. But love, patient, stubborn, hopeful, always sought its place. In stolen moments, in shared burdens, in glances across a crowded hall, the medieval heart reached for connection, for comfort, for the promise that even in a hard world, tenderness could bloom. In the medieval world, the balance between love and duty was a delicate one, often tipped more by the needs of family, faith, and survival than by the desires of the heart. People lived within rigid frameworks set by birth, status, and belief. And yet, no matter how tight those bindings, love found small cracks through which it could grow, sometimes quietly, sometimes boldly, always at risk of being stifled by the heavy hand of custom. In villages scattered across fields and forests, where life moved with the turning of the plow and the ringing of the church bell, love was most often a matter of practicality. A man might notice a woman, not for the glow of her smile, but for her skill in spinning wool, the strength of her arms as she hoed a row of beans, or the care she gave to a sick neighbor. A woman might look to a suitor's ability to thatch a roof, mend a cartwheel, or guide a stubborn ox. In these places, affection grew slowly, like a seed beneath the soil, nurtured by shared tasks and mutual respect. The community watched closely. Every glance exchanged at market, every word passed at the well, might be noted and whispered about. In a small village, There were no secrets. Reputation was fragile, and a young woman whose modesty was questioned, or a young man who seemed feckless, might find themselves shunned when it came time to seek a spouse. The approval of family was everything. A match that brought a good dowry, useful tools, or a fine piece of land was prized above a match made for love alone. Festivals and saints' days offered brief chances for freedom. At these times, when work paused and the village green filled with laughter, music, and the scent of roasting meat, young people might dance, sing, and steal a few moments of near privacy. Ribbons were tied, tokens exchanged, and for a little while, the weight of duty was lifted. But even then, chaperones hovered, watchful eyes followed every step, and what was begun in joy could end in scandal if care was not taken. Marriage among peasants was a simple but solemn affair. The church blessed the union, the village shared in the feast, and the couple began a partnership that was as much about survival as sentiment. A dowry might include a cow, some geese, or a well-made cloak. The groom's gift might be a hut with a sturdy roof, a patch of tilled land, or the promise of hard work. Love, when it came, often followed rather than led. Among the nobility, marriage was rarely about the heart. Land, wealth, and alliances shaped every union. A young girl of noble birth might be promised, while still in her cradle, her future sealed by treaty or truce. A young lord might have little say in whom he wed, his duty to his lineage weighing heavier than any personal desire. Noble weddings were grand spectacles, with banquets that lasted for days, tapestries hung in celebration, minstrels singing songs of honor and loyalty. But behind the splendor were calculations. What lands were gained, what debts forgiven, what enemies turned into kin. The bride and groom were pieces on a chessboard, moved not by their own hands, but by the will of their elders. Within these unions, love was a rare blossom, but not impossible. Time, shared trials, the raising of children, these could soften hearts. In some marriages, friendship grew where love had not been planted. In others, cold courtesy or outright dislike endured through the years, hidden beneath polite words. In separate chambers, courtly love provided an outlet for the noble heart's longings. A knight might choose a lady to serve, his devotion offered in poems, songs, and deeds of valor. He might wear her favor at a tournament, ride in her name, or compose verses praising her eyes, her hair, her virtue. The lady was to remain distant, inspiring but unattainable, the star to his night sky. And yet, such devotion could slip into dangerous passion, risking scandal, ruin, or worse. The church's teachings were clear. Marriage was a sacrament, not to be entered into lightly or broken easily. Adultery was a sin, divorce nearly unthinkable, annulments rare and difficult. Love was to be tempered by duty, passion by prayer. But the human heart is not so easily ruled. Despite sermons and strictures, people loved as they could, sometimes wisely, often not. Tokens of affection, a carved whistle, a lock of hair, a ribbon tied at a sword's hilt, carried weight beyond their small size. A gift accepted could signal hope. A gift discovered by the wrong eyes could spark disaster. And yet, such tokens passed from hand to hand, as they always have and always will, speaking where words could not. Widowhood offered both sorrow and, for some, freedom. A woman who had buried a husband might find herself with a voice in matters once closed to her. She might manage lands, oversee tenants, or choose whether or not to wed again. Some did, seeking companionship or protection. Others remained alone, content in their hard-won independence. Through it all, love found ways to endure. Not always the love of songs and stories, but the quiet, steady love that grows from shared burdens, kind words, and the comfort of a hand reached out in the dark. In a world where duty so often ruled, love was a defiance. Gentle, patient, and in its own way, heroic. In a world defined by hierarchy, faith, and survival, the idea of love was as complex as the web of obligations that bound every man, woman. Whether one lived beneath the thatch of a peasant's hut or the vaulted ceilings of a noble hall, the heart's longing for connection beat on, muffled at times by duty, but never fully silenced. And so, from village greens to castle courts, from monastery cloisters to bustling markets, the dance of affection unfolded in 1,000 subtle ways. For those who worked the land, where the rising sun marked the start of labor and the setting, sun the promise of rest, love was most often a partnership forged in necessity. A woman might look to a suitor's strength, his skill in the field or forest, the steadiness of his hand as he repaired a broken plow or built a fence strong enough to keep out wolves. A man might admire a woman's thrift with cloth and grain, her gentle way with animals, her ability to coax life from stubborn soil. Words were few, gestures quiet but telling. An offered basket of apples, a repaired roof, a fire kindled before the storm got, and all the while, the village watched. A community small enough that no glance went unseen, no word unheard. A reputation, carefully tended, could be lost with a single foolish act. Parents advised, neighbors gossiped, and the priest reminded all that modesty and virtue were as vital to marriage as a dowry or a field. Love, if it came at all, was to come quietly, shaped by the needs of farm and family, blessed by the church, approved by kin. At festivals and holy days, when music filled the air and the weight of toil lifted for a time, young folk might laugh and dance, freed for a moment from watchful eyes. Tokens were exchanged, a carved spoon, a woven bracelet, a sprig of rosemary, each carrying more meaning than any public word could dare. These were the times when dreams were allowed, if only briefly. Marriage was the culmination of these cautious beginnings, a contract as much as a union of souls. Among peasants, it meant shared labor, shared burdens, and the hope of shared joy. The church blessed the vows. The community feasted and danced. A cow, a goat, a patch of land, a sturdy hut. These were the building blocks of married life. Love, in this world, was a seed planted in duty's soil, to grow or wither as the seasons turned. For nobles, marriage was a chess game of lands and titles, debts and alliances. A young lady's hand might be promised before she learned to write. Her name, her future tied to the ambitions of her father, the needs of her house. A young lord's bride chosen for what she brought. A boarder secured, a quarrel ended, a dowry to fill empty coffers. Weddings were grand, filled with music, rich food, and elaborate dress. But behind the finery lay calculations as cold as any winter wind. And yet, the heart's longing could not always be stilled. Courtly love offered nobles a way to express the feelings duty forbade. A knight might ride for his lady's honor, wear her favor in battle, pen verses that spoke of her beauty, her virtue, her unattainable grace. The lady, in turn, was to inspire, not yield, to remain distant, admired but untouched. The gain was one of longing, of devotion without reward. But sometimes the game turned real, and passion broke the fragile rules, bringing ruin in its wake. The church watched over these unions, these longings, these transgressions. Marriage was a sacrament, not to be entered into lightly, nor broken easily. Adultery was a sin, divorce, all but impossible. Annulment, a rare and difficult path. Love, the clergy taught, must be governed by discipline, by prayer, by duty. And yet the heart often strayed, seeking solace where it could not in monasteries and convents, where vows of chastity and devotion to God shaped every day. Even there, the human need for connection found quiet expression. A glance shared over a manuscript, a word of kindness at the garden's edge, a hymn sung with unusual fervor, all spoke of the longing that no robe or rule could fully banish. Widows, freed by death from the bonds of marriage, often found new roles, managing lands, guiding households, speaking with voices once silenced by the authority of husbands. Some remarried, choosing companions for affection or protection. Others chose solitude, their years of service repaid at last, with peace dot throughout all of this. Tokens of love, small, simple, sincere, passed from hand to hand. A lock of hair, a carved bead, a ribbon tied at a belt. Each carried risks and hopes alike. In a world where so much was governed by duty, love remained a quiet act of courage, a defiance of custom, a whisper of the heart dot in the medieval world, where duty often weighed heavier than the desires of the heart. The pursuit of love was both an act of courage and a delicate game. Life was governed by faith, law, and survival, and yet the human need for connection, companionship, and affection always found ways to emerge, sometimes in full light, but more often in shadowed corners where glances were stolen and words were whispered rather than spoken aloud. Among the peasantry, where life was measured by the cycle of seasons, the demands of harvest, and the needs of the hearth, love was a matter woven into daily labor. A man might catch sight of a woman at the well, admire the way she balanced her water jug, the quiet efficiency with which she tended her family's animals, or the strength of her hands as she wove cloth or tilled the earth. A woman might notice a man's steady work with axe or plow, the care he took with tools, or his patience with younger siblings or aged parents. Romance, in this setting, was no grand affair. It grew quietly, nurtured by shared burdens and small kindnesses. An arm offered when the path was muddy, a bundle of firewood left at a doorstep, a roof repaired before a storm dot. The watchful eyes of family and neighbors saw everything. A careless word, a reckless meeting, or even too long a glance could spark gossip that might damage a young person's chances of making a respectable match. The approval of parents was vital, for marriage was not just the union of two souls, but the joining of two households, two sets of responsibilities, two futures. Dowries mattered. A cow, a few geese, a chest of fine linens. So did the groom's standing, a sound hut, a sturdy roof, perhaps a small patch of land, or a valuable tool. On feast days, at saints' celebrations, or during the harvest festival, young people found moments when laughter was allowed and the rules of decorum loosened, if only slightly. Music filled the air, dances were shared, tokens were exchanged, a ribbon, a carved whistle, a sprig of lavender. These were rare times when affection might show itself, if only briefly, without risking scandal. The wedding itself, when it came, was a communal affair. The church blessed the union, the priest intoned sacred words, and the village gathered to eat, drink, and dance. The couple began their married life with the support of the community, with gifts of bread, ale, and small necessities. Love might come in time, growing as the couple shared their struggles and victories, their losses and gains. Or it might not, and they would learn to endure, to live as partners in duty if not in affection. Among nobles, the stakes were higher and the choices fewer. Marriage was arranged not for the heart, but for the family's gain, for land, for alliances, for wealth, for peace between rival houses. A girl of noble birth might be betrothed in infancy, her fate sealed before she could speak a word. A young lord's bride would be chosen to strengthen his house, to bring a rich dowry, or to secure a strategic border. The wedding feasts were grand, filled with color, song, and spectacle. But beneath the surface, cold calculations ruled. And yet, even in this world of contracts and treaties, the heart sometimes defied duty. Courtly love flourished as a ritualized form of longing, a game of admiration, played between knight and lady. A knight might dedicate his deeds to a noblewoman, his loyalty expressed in battle, in tournaments, in verse. The lady, bound to remain, distant and pure, inspired him from afar. Theirs was a love meant to remain unfulfilled, a source of poetry and noble suffering, not of scandal or sin. Yet passion is a dangerous player, and sometimes the game became all too real, with consequences as swift as they were severe. In the cloistered world of monks and nuns, love found different paths, quieter, more subtle, but no less powerful. A kind word shared in passing, a psalm sung with unexpected tenderness, a moment of understanding exchanged across the scriptorium. These small signs spoke of the longing that no vow could completely banish. The rules were strict, but the human heart remained what it always has been, longing, hoping, seeking connection. Widowhood brought with it both sorrow and, for some, a kind of freedom. A widow might control property, guide her family's affairs, or even choose her next match if she wished to remarry. Some did, seeking companionship, security, or simply the comfort of a shared roof. Others chose to remain alone, content with the independence that widowhood brought, free at last from the dictates of a husband's will. Throughout all classes, tokens of affection carried great meaning. A lock of hair, a carved token, a strip of cloth tied secretly to a sword hilt. These small things spoke volumes. They were gestures of hope, of defiance, of quiet bravery in a world where open declarations of love could bring ruin. Love, when it blossomed, was an act of courage, a reminder that even in an age of duty and discipline, the heart had its own will and its own voice. In the world of the Middle Ages, where the rhythms of life were dictated by the seasons, by the tolling of church bells, and by the demands of work and faith, love found its place as both a blessing and a burden. The heart's desires were rarely simple, for they had to wind their way through a maze of duty, expectation, and survival. From the humblest farmstead to the grandest castle, affection often had to wear a mask of propriety, of modesty, of duty, even when it burned brightly beneath. For the peasant working the land, love was a partner in the struggle against hunger, cold, and hardship. A man's worth was measured not in words of love or gifts of flowers, but in the strength of his arm, the steadiness of his step, the way he repaired the tools of life and guarded the flock from wolves. A woman's value lay in her skill at managing a household, in her thrift with food and cloth, in the gentleness of her care for children and the aged. And in this world of toil, where every mouth had to be fed and every winter survived, love was often something that grew slowly, like a tree putting down roots over the years. There were no long, romantic walks or whispered promises beneath the stars, not in the ordinary life of the village. Instead, there were shared labors, glances exchanged over the plow or the cooking pot, quiet kindnesses offered without fanfare, a basket of eggs left at a door, a shoulder offered to bear a heavy load, a roof patched before the rains came. These were the gestures that spoke of affection in a language older than words. The community watched, as it always did. A reputation was a fragile thing, easily broken by careless talk or foolish action. Families took great care in guiding the choices of their sons and daughters, for a marriage was not only a union of two hearts, but of two houses, two sets of hopes, two paths through life, joined together for better or worse. Dowries were modest: a goat, a pig, a few coins, a good blanket, but they mattered. And a suitor's worth was judged not only by his feelings, but by what he could offer in shelter, strength, and security. On festival days, when music rang, through the air, and the smell of roast meat mingled with the sweet scent of ale and flowers, there was room, if only for a short while, for laughter and flirtation. The dances offered moments when hands might touch, when eyes might meet across the crowd, when tokens might change hands. A carved whistle, a woven bracelet, a sprig of rosemary. These small things carried meaning, hope, and sometimes sorrow. For not every love could be fulfilled. Among the nobility, the stakes were higher and the choices narrower. A noblewoman's hand in marriage was a prize, bargained over by fathers and uncles, kings and lords. A nobleman's bride was chosen for the wealth she brought, the lands she secured, the alliances she forged. Weddings were grand affairs, filled with music, color, and spectacle. But beneath the finery lay the hard truths of politics and power. Yet even in this world of duty, the heart sometimes refused to be silenced. Courtly love flourished in songs and poems, in the secret sighs of knights for ladies they could never hope to claim. A knight might dedicate his every deed to a lady's honor, wear her colors at a tournament, or pen verses praising her beauty and virtue. The lady, bound by duty and reputation, was meant to inspire, but not to yield. And sometimes, what began as a game of longing became a true passion, bringing with it danger, scandal, and sorrow. The church stood guard over marriage, teaching that it was a sacrament, not to be entered lightly nor broken easily. Adultery was a grave sin, divorce almost unknown, annulment a path open only in rare and difficult cases. Love, the clergy preached, must serve virtue and duty, not selfish desire. But the human heart often strayed beyond the bounds set for it, seeking warmth and solace where it could dot in monasteries and convents, where vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience shaped every day. Love found even quieter forms. A shared glance in the scriptorium, a kind word offered during a task, a hymn sung with unusual fervor. These small moments carried more weight than many grand gestures in the world beyond the walls. For even behind stone and rule, the heart continued to hope, to long, to feel. Widowhood, when it came, brought both grief and, for some, a measure of freedom. A widow might manage lands, make decisions, and speak with a voice once hushed by the authority of a husband. Some chose to remarry, seeking companionship or protection. Others chose solitude, finding peace in a life at last their own to shape. Throughout all classes, tokens of love passed from hand to hand. A ribbon, a lock of hair, a carved bead, a strip of cloth tied secretly to a sword's hilt. These were gestures of hope and defiance in a world where open declarations could bring ruin. And when love blossomed, whether in the light of day or in the shadow of secrecy, it was always an act of quiet courage in a tapestry of medieval life, where every thread was woven by duty, faith, and necessity. Love was not the central pattern, but a delicate embroidery added where space and fortune allowed. People lived by the seasons, by the turning of the soil, by the rising and setting of the sun, and love, when it came, had to fit within these cycles. In villages where roofs were thatched, paths were muddy, and the air was thick with the smell of earth, animals, and smoke, affection showed itself in practical ways. A young man might offer help repairing a neighbor's fence, or carry a heavy bucket from the well. A young woman might mend a torn tunic, or share a portion of fresh-baked bread. These small kindnesses spoke of interest and care more deeply than any poem or song could. Parents watched with care. A good match mattered for survival, for the family's future, for the strength of the household. Love was welcome, but only if it came with sound judgment, good character, and a bit of property or skill. A suitor without land, tools, or prospects was unlikely to win approval, no matter how kind his heart. A bride without a dowry, whether in coins, livestock, or household goods, would find few doors open. Festivals and feast days gave space for young hearts to hope. The harvest celebration, the Saints' Day procession, the midwinter fair, these were times when music played, laughter was shared, and the watchful eyes of the community softened just enough to allow a smile, a dance, a token exchanged beneath. A banner or tree, a woven ribbon, a carved bead, a sprig of herbs carried hidden meaning. These small gifts might be cherished or hidden away, kept secret even from the giver's family. Marriage, when it came, was a solemn contract. The church blessed it as a sacrament. The law regarded it as binding. The village saw it as the joining of two houses, two fields, two sets of hands and hopes. The bride's dowry was accounted, perhaps a cow, a chest of linens, a small plot of garden. The groom's offerings were measured, a sound roof, a steady income, a promise of work and care. The wedding feast brought joy, but beneath the songs and dancing lay the knowledge that this union was about survival as much as sentiment. Among the nobility, marriage was rarely about affection. It was strategy, alliance, duty. A noble girl might be promised before she could walk, her hand given to secure a border, to end a feud, to gain a fortune. A noble youth's bride was chosen for what she brought to his house: lands, gold, soldiers, or favor at court. The wedding itself was a display of power and wealth, with banners, feasts, and tournaments. But the heart's hopes often had no place at the table. And yet, even in castles of stone and halls of law, the heart whispered. Courtly love, that strange blend of admiration, longing, and performance, offered a path for those whose true feelings could not be spoken. A knight might ride into battle wearing a lady's favor, a sleeve, a scarf, a token hidden in his armor. He might write verses praising her grace, her beauty, her virtue. The lady, bound by duty, inspired without yielding, keeping a line between longing and scandal sharp and clear. But sometimes that line blurred, and hearts that should have stayed apart drew too close, bringing danger and sorrow. The church taught that marriage was sacred, unbreakable save by death or rare annulment. Love was to follow duty, not lead it. Passion was to be mastered, not indulged. Adultery was a grave sin. Divorce was nearly impossible. And yet, as always, the heart did not always obey. Secret meetings, hidden letters, tokens exchanged beneath the gaze of saints and angels. These things happened, for the human heart is ever thus. Within monasteries and convents, love wore a quieter face. A shared look during prayer, a word of comfort at a sickbed, a psalm sung with uncommon feeling. These small things carry deep meaning in lives bound by vow and rule. Forbiddens, yes, but real all the same. Widowhood, when it came, was sorrowful, but often freeing. A widow might manage land, make contracts, direct servants, and, if she chose, marry again. Some did, for comfort or security. Others chose solitude, a life at last their own. Through it all, tokens of love passed from hand to hand: a lock of hair, a carved charm, a strip of cloth tied to a sword's hilt. Small things that spoke of large hopes, of courage, of defiance. For to love in such a world was always to risk, always to hope, always to act with quiet bravery. In the medieval world, where the weight of faith, duty, and survival shaped every life, love remained a quiet rebellion, a flame flickering in the cold winds of necessity. Beneath the stone towers of castles, and within the mud walls of peasant huts, the human heart dreamed of connection, of understanding, of shared joy in a world often ruled by hardship. In the countryside, where fields stretched toward distant forests and the rhythm of the plow dictated the pace of life, affection grew slowly, like the crops sown in spring and harvested in autumn. A young man might mark a maiden's kindness as she tended to her family's animals, or the grace of her movements at the well. A girl might notice a boy's patience with a stubborn mule, or the steady care he showed in patching a roof or mending a fence. Love was built not on grand words, but on small, steady acts. Parents kept a careful watch. The future of a household could rest on a marriage well made. A good match brought strength, security, and hope for the seasons ahead. A poor match risked hunger, hardship, or shame. Dowries were modest among peasants. Perhaps a goat, a piglet, a warm blanket woven by hand. The suitor's worth was measured not by sweet words, but by the promise of a steady hand, a sound roof, a field well tilled. Feast days and fairs offered. Rare moments when the rules of daily life loosened just a little. Music played, laughter filled the air, and young people could meet beneath the watchful gaze of saints' banners and village elders. A dance, a glance, a shared cup of ale, these small moments fed the heart's hunger. And sometimes, in the shadow of a bonfire, or beneath the boughs of an ancient tree, tokens changed hands. A woven cord, a carved bead, a sprig of rosemary. These were not treasures of gold or silver, but they held the weight of hope. Among nobles, marriage was a matter of politics, of alliance, of strategy. A noblewoman's future was decided in council chambers, and by treaties signed with wax seals and iron pens. A nobleman's bride was chosen for the lands she brought, the soldiers she commanded, the favor she won at court. Love was not expected, though it was sometimes hoped for. Weddings were splendid affairs, banners flying, minstrels singing, tables heavy with meat and sweetmeats, goblets raised in toasts. But beneath the glittering surface lay the hard truths of duty and gain. And yet, even where duty ruled, the heart whispered. Courtly love offered a language for feelings that could not be spoken plainly. A knight might wear a lady's token at a tournament, his colors marked with her favor. He might write verses that praised her beauty, her kindness, her strength. She, in turn, was meant to inspire, to remain distant, to lift his spirit without yielding her own. Theirs was a dance of longing, beautiful and bittersweet. And sometimes the dance led where it should not, into danger, into scandal, into sorrow. The church taught that marriage was sacred, a bond blessed by God, unbroken, save by death or rare annulment. Adultery was sin. Divorce was near impossible. Love, the clergy said, should follow duty, not lead it. But hearts do not always listen to sermons. A glance across a crowded hall, a letter slipped beneath a door, a stolen meeting in a garden at dusk. These things happened, even in the most watchful of worlds. In monasteries and convents, love took on the quiet shape of small kindnesses, a psalm sung with tenderness, a word of comfort at the bedside of the sick, a shared task done, side by side. Such things were not meant to be more than charity or friendship, but the human heart, even wrapped in vows and cloistered behind stone, still longed, still hoped, still dreamed. Widowhood brought both sorrow and unexpected freedom. A widow might manage her own land, make decisions for her household, guide the futures of her children. Some chose to marry again, seeking comfort or security. Others found peace in solitude, shaping a life that at last was theirs to guide. Throughout it all, tokens of affection passed hand to hand, a ribbon, a carved charm, a strip of cloth tied to a sword's hilt. Small things that carried large meanings, of hope, of defiance, of quiet courage. For to love in such a world was always to risk, always to hope, always to act with a bravery unspoken, but deeply felt in the medieval world, where the turn of the seasons marked time more surely than any clock. Love remained both a rare treasure and a constant risk. Beneath the weight of tradition, duty, and survival, the human heart continued to dream, whether within the rough walls of a peasant's hut or behind the high stone of a noble's keep. Love was the quiet rebellion. It reminded people they were more than their roles, their lands, or their duties. In the fields, where the earth was both toil and life, love grew like the crops, slowly, with care, and only if the conditions were kind. A young man might first notice a maiden as she tended a garden or carried water from the well. A maiden might mark a youth by the way he soothed a restless horse or repaired a broken gate without complaint. No grand declarations, no shining gifts, just small gestures that spoke of character, of patience, of strength. The eyes of the village were always watching. Every glance, every word was weighed and measured, for reputation was as fragile as a clay pot and as hard to mend. A family's honor was tied to its daughter's virtue and its son's conduct. A father looked not only at a suitor's smile, but at his land, his tools, his prospects. A mother considered not only a maiden's pretty face, but her dowry, her skills at the hearth, her kindness to neighbors. Love might blossom, but it had to bloom within these narrow walls. Feast days and fairs were moments when the heart could hope. Music filled the air. The smell of roasting meat mingled with the scent of flowers, and the watchfulness of the world softened just enough to allow a dance, a smile, a shared cup of cider. Beneath garlands or beside the maypole, tokens might pass from hand to hand, a carved spoon, a woven ribbon, a sprig of herbs. These small gifts were not wealth, but they were rich in meaning. Marriage was the true joining of lives, blessed by the church, witnessed by the village, and bound by law. The bride's dowry was counted: a goat, a pig, a chest of linen, a few coins. The groom's offerings were measured: a house, a roof that did not leak, tools for work, and hands that would labor through winter's cold and summer's heat. The feast was joyful, but beneath the laughter and dancing lay the quiet understanding that this was a partnership built for survival, not for romance. Among nobles, marriage was more bargain than blessing. A maiden's hand was a prize to be given in exchange for land, soldiers, or peace between feuding houses. A young lord's bride was chosen not for her smile or her wit, but for the alliances she would seal. The wedding might be a grand affair, filled with banners, minstrels, and feasting, but the hearts of bride and groom were rarely consulted. Love, if it came, was an unexpected guest, and yet hearts are stubborn things. In the shadow of duty, courtly love offered a voice for longing that could not be spoken plainly. A knight might wear his lady's favor at a tournament, a scarf, a ribbon, a token tied to his lance. He might write verses praising her beauty, her kindness, her grace. She, in turn, inspired without yielding, offering a smile or a kind word, but never crossing the line between honor and scandal. Yet sometimes that line was crossed, and longing turned to secret meetings, whispered promises, and the risk of ruin. The church taught that marriage was a sacrament, blessed by God and unbreakable save by death. Adultery was a sin that endangered the soul. Divorce was almost unknown. Love was to follow duty, not lead it. But human hearts have always been slow to obey such teachings. A glance across a crowded hall, a letter hidden in the folds of a cloak, a meeting stolen in a quiet garden. These things happened because love is part of the human spirit. In monasteries and convents, love was not meant to enter at all, and yet it found its way in, as it always does. A shared task, a word of comfort, a hymn sung with unusual feeling. These small moments took on deep meaning in lives where every other connection was bound by vows. Even behind stone walls and beneath the strict gaze of abbots and prioresses, hearts dreamed, hoped, and sometimes strayed. Widowhood brought sorrow, but for some, it also brought a measure of freedom. A widow might oversee her lands, make contracts, guide her children's futures. Some remarried, seeking comfort or security. Others chose solitude, finding peace in a life finally their own to shape. And always, tokens of affection passed quietly. From hand to hand, a ribbon, a bead, a strip of cloth tied to a sword's hilt. Small, simple things, but they carried the weight of great hopes and quiet courage. For in a world where duty reigned and the eyes of many watched, to love was always to risk, and always to hope not in the heart of the medieval world, where duty often eclipsed desire, and the land shaped the lives of those who toiled upon it. The human yearning for connection remained undiminished. Beneath the weight of expectation, beneath the gaze of kin and community, hearts still dreamed of warmth, of laughter shared, of burdens halved by another's hand. In villages where the plow turned the earth, and the seasons governed every action, affection took root in the small spaces left by necessity. A young man's admiration might begin not with a glance across a hall, but with watching a maiden carry water without complaint or tend to the sick with gentle hands. A maiden's regard might grow as she noticed a boy's care for his siblings, or his willingness to help an aging neighbor mend a roof. In this world, actions spoke louder than words, and love was often measured not in poetry or song, but in the steady rhythm of daily deeds that the watchful eyes of the community meant that no gesture went unseen, no word unheard. A misstep could stain a family's honor. A thoughtless word could spark gossip that spread like wildfire through narrow lanes and over low fences. And so, affection grew slowly, carefully, like a flame shielded from the wind. A suitor's worth was judged by his land, his livestock, his reputation for honesty and hard work. A maiden's value lay in her dowry, her skills at hearth and loom, her kindness to others. Love, though welcome, was rarely the first consideration, yet there were moments when hearts could hope, when the weight of duty lifted just enough to allow a smile, a dance, a shared cup of ale. Feast days, fairs, and harvest celebrations offered these rare chances. Beneath garlands of flowers or the flicker of lanterns, tokens might change hands: a carved spoon, a woven bracelet, a sprig of rosemary. Such small gifts spoke what words could not, and carried the silent promise of affection. That marriage was the binding of two lives, witnessed by kin, blessed by priest, and recorded in the memory of the village. The bride's dowry might include a cow, a piglet, a chest of linen, a few silver coins. The groom offered a house, a patch of land, tools for his trade, strong hands willing to labor through winter's cold and summer's heat. The feast was joyful, but beneath the laughter and music lay the understanding that this was a union forged as much for survival as for affection. Among nobles, marriage was treaty as much as bond. A maiden's hand was given to secure alliances, to bring lands together, to end feuds that had cost lives. A young lord's bride was chosen for her lineage, her inheritance, her power to strengthen a house's position. The wedding was grand, banners flying, minstrels singing, tables groaning beneath the weight of food and drink. But love was a guest rarely invited. Yet even in these courts of power, hearts longed for what duty denied. Courtly love offered a voice to longing, a language for desire that could not be openly declared. A knight might wear his lady's favor at a tournament, might write verses praising her grace, her kindness, her strength. She, in turn, might offer a smile, a glance, a word of encouragement, enough to sustain his devotion, but not so much as to invite scandal. And sometimes the line between longing and action blurred, and what began as admiration became risk, danger, even ruin. The church taught that marriage was sacred, a bond blessed by God and broken only by death. Adultery was sin, divorce near, impossible. Love, the church taught, must follow duty, not lead it. But human hearts are unruly, and so glances were exchanged across crowded halls, letters slipped beneath doors, meetings stolen in quiet gardens at dusk dot, in monasteries and convents. Where vows bound hearts to God alone, affection was not meant to bloom. And yet, in shared labors and whispered prayers, in kindness offered at the right moment, the seeds of connection sometimes took root. A hymn sung with feeling, a task done together, a word of comfort in the night, these small things took on great meaning in lives otherwise marked by silence and obedience. For widows, love's second chance came mingled with sorrow. Widowhood brought freedom of a kind, the right to manage lands, to guide children's futures, to shape one's own days. Some remarried, seeking comfort, security, or partnership. Others found peace in solitude, in a life finally their own to command. And always, tokens of affection passed quietly between hands. A ribbon, a bead, a lock of hair, a strip of cloth tied to a sword's hilt. Small things that carried great hopes, that spoke of courage in a world where to love was always to risk and always to hope. And so, in the winding tale of medieval love, we arrive at the final chapter of our journey. A chapter not written on scrolls of parchment or etched in stone, but whispered in the hearts of those who dared to hope, to long, and to dream in a world ruled by duty and survival. Across the breadth of fields, through castle halls, beneath the vaulted roofs of cathedrals and the thatched eaves of cottages, love wove its quiet thread, binding together the humble and the mighty, the free and the bound, the young and the sea. Old, for the peasant in his small hut, love was measured in shared labors and quiet acts of kindness. The man who brought an extra bundle of firewood, who stayed late to help mend the fence, who offered the choicest turnip from his patch, he spoke his affection not in words, but in deeds. The woman who tended a neighbor's child, who wove a warm cloak for winter, who saved the last of the bread for her family. She, too, spoke the language of care. Together, they forged partnerships that endured the long, cold nights, the hungry springs, the back-breaking summers, and the wet, weary autumns. For the noble, love was a more perilous path. Marriage was alliance, strategy, contract. A maiden's hand was bartered for land, peace, power. A young lord was pledged to strengthen a house, to end a feud, to gain a fortress. Their weddings were grand, but their hearts were rarely consulted. And yet, amid these cold calculations, love sometimes bloomed, fragile, hidden, defiant. The glance across a hall, the letter slipped between books, the token tied to a lance at a tournament. These were the signs of hearts that yearned, even when duty decreed otherwise. Courtly love gave voice to longing that could not be openly declared. A knight rode beneath his lady's colors, fought for her honor, composed verses in her praise. She inspired him, offered him a smile, a word, a ribbon, enough to sustain his devotion, but not enough to threaten her reputation. And when admiration grew too bold, when longing crossed the line into action, the cost was high. Scandal, exile, ruin. But still, hearts risked awe, for love is as stubborn as it is sweet. In convents and monasteries, where walls of stone and vows of silence sought to shield hearts from earthly attachments, love found subtle forms. A shared task done with care, a hymn sung with unexpected tenderness, a glance that lingered too long. These small moments carried weight in lives meant to be given wholly to God. Some resisted, some fell, and some found that even within the cloister, the heart could not be entirely tamed. The Church taught that marriage was sacred, unbroken but by death, a bond blessed by God. And so, most bore its burdens with grace or resignation. Yet the heart sometimes strayed. Affairs bloomed in secret. Glances became promises. Promises became sins. And though the Church condemned, and society judged, love's wildfire continued to burn, hidden beneath duty's ashes. For widows and widowers, love offered a second chance, tempered by sorrow, but no less real. Some found comfort in new companionship. Others found peace in solitude. For them, love's final chapter was one of choice, rare in a world where so little was chosen freely. And so, as our story draws to its end, we see that love in the Middle Ages was not unlike love in any age. It was cautious and bold, secret, and celebrated, practical and poetic. It was shaped by the world, by duty, by survival, by law, but it was never wholly conquered by it. The heart, after all, is the one sovereign every age must reckon with. In the end, tokens of affection, a carved spoon, a woven ribbon, a lock of hair, passed from hand to hand. Words of longing were whispered beneath starry skies, across busy market squares, within quiet chapels. Songs were sung, letters written, glances exchanged. And though the world watched, judged, and tried to bind love in chains of law and custom, love endured. Because love, whether in a peasant's hut or a lord's hall, in a convent's garden, or a knight's tent, is the one rebellion no age can wholly suppress, the one hope no heart can ever quite abandon. And so, as the candles burn low and the music fades, let us remember that even in the harshest times, even under the sternest, rules love found a way. It always does.